Hello, and today what we're going to focus on is India and imperialism, continuing our theme for this age of imperialism by looking at case studies of China, India, Japan, the Ottoman Empire, so on and so forth. And the most important thing is not only to get the narrative of what's happening in the region, but also to start seeing similarities with other regions, seeing how there's nationalism growing in response, seeing how Europe utilized means to maintain economic control over the different areas, things of that nature. So, when we look at India before 1800, we want to start first with the empire that is ruling over India, which is the Mughal Empire. By 1707, the Mughal Empire is in a state of decline, of collapse. The tensions between the Hindu population and the Muslim population is boiled over, and a civil war is taking root. While that civil war is going on between various regional kings and princes, Europeans are starting to interject themselves into the conflict. So the Europeans have come in a variety of forms, but the two biggest forms I want to focus on is the British East India Company and the French East India Company. Now, the British East India Company is one of those joint stock companies that we talked about last semester. And the British government is going to grant the British East India Company autonomy in order to function independently within India. They're also going to grant these people a monopoly of trade. The ability to act autonomously is important because it allows them to raise their own army, it allows them to secure treaties, it allows them to impose taxes on people that they control. Basically, this East India Company can act as a quasi state. The East India Company is going to employ sepoys in their army. A sepoy is an Indian soldier serving for the British and providing military support for the British. They are Hindu and Muslim, so they pull from different parts of the population as well as different groups. Those are just the two big ones. And the sepoys are going to play a critical part of this story as we go through. Secondly, we have the French East India Company, and the French East India Company is kind of like the British East India Company. They're trying to access Indian markets um, to obtain goods. They're making alliances with local kings and local princes. So what happens is that both of these East India companies, they're competing for the market of India. And the way they're working through this competition is by making alliances with local kings. And as more and more alliances are made, each of these companies become more powerful. That brings us to the 7 Years' War, which you may remember is a war between Britain and France. This war between Britain and France is international. They find themselves in Canada and throughout what is today the United States, in the Caribbean, and in India. So that's the definition: a war between France and Britain that has a global a global stage on which this fighting was taking place. And in India, the Battle of Plassey in 1757 is going to pit the English and their Indian allies against the French and their Indian allies. And at the end of the day, the English come out victorious, which means that the French have been pushed out of Indian affairs, and the British are now the sole European power in India, in Indian politics and in Indian economics. So going forward, it's Britain who's going to be in India and only Britain. They're not going to have to compete with other European powers. So now we want to talk about the impact of the British presence. And as I talk about this, I want you to realize that this is both under the East India Company and under the British government, because India is going to split into who's controlling what when. So initially, it's going to be the East India Company until about 1858. And then after 1858, it will be the British Crown. Regardless, the British are going to have a significant impact on India. The first one is the construction of railroads and roads. This infrastructure is necessary to allow the East India Company and other British companies to engage in business. For example, if you remember, we took a look at an advertisement last week with the rationales for imperialism, and we saw a factory harvesting tea leaves in the middle of India. Railroads are needed to get that tea leaves or those tea leaves out to the coast to be shipped back to Europe. So these railroads and roads are going to be constructed by the British for British purposes. It's not going to be constructed to help the Indians out. It's constructed to help out the British economic interests. However, this is going to help to unite or to bring together the various regions of the Indian subcontinent. Second, security measures are going to be put into place. Bandits are going to be cleared out in the countryside, which is going to help to protect trade and stimulate trade as well. Christian missionaries, letter C, Christian missionaries are going to become more active and more aggressive about converting local Hindu populations, especially over to Christianity. And this is really a incursion, if you will, an encroachment on the Indian culture. And this is not viewed positively by many Indians, but because the missionaries have the protection of the British, they're allowed to kind of operate without any interference. Social changes, slavery is going to come to an end. Now, that's part of the British abolition movement that had been going on. Abolitionism was particularly prominent within Britain. And as the British Empire expands throughout the globe, that legal concept of abolition, the putting abolition into the law, gets implemented throughout their empire as well. India is no exception. Now, with the caste system, what the British will do is take that caste system, that traditional caste system, and simplify it down to four different levels. So, the original caste system that predates India, that goes back thousands of years and is steeped within the religion of Hinduism, is much more nuanced and much more complicated, and actually may not have been as big of a social divide as we make it out to be today. What the British did was they categorized the Indian population into membership within the caste. In other words, the British took the caste system and used it to their ends as a way of organizing the Indian society. And then the sati, which is the practice of widows throwing themselves into the funeral pyres of their husbands, came to an end. Now, the sati, just to spend a couple seconds on it, the sati had faced many challenges to it over the years. Akbar attempted to outlaw it. It was a tradition that dates back thousands of years where a wife was expected to throw herself into the fires of her deceased husband. So, as the husband is being burned, the wife was expected to jump in and join him for eternity. Now, this type of widow suicide sometimes was resisted by women, and women sometimes were forced into it by other members of society or other members of the family. So the sati had always been seen as kind of a brutal practice that needed to come to an end within India. And it wasn't just the British who put an end to the sati, but it's also Indian modernists, people in India who favored modernizing India that wanted to put a stop to the sati. In fact, in 1987, India passed a law that essentially made, made any type of practice of the sati punishable by death. So if somebody had thrown a woman in or pressured a woman to join in, they could be held liable for participating in this. And between 2003 and 2015, there are at least four reported incidents of the sati being carried out. So, this is an example of a cultural practice that throughout history has been frowned upon and has bounced back and forth in popularity. Obviously, today it's highly illegal. Um, the British are going to bring in a Western based education system. And what this Western based education system is going to do is expose the Indian population to Western ideas. Particularly interesting are the ideas of the Enlightenment and liberalism, the idea of free speech, free press, the idea of natural rights, the idea of the consent of the governed are going to start infusing themselves into Indian political thought. And throughout the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, Indian leaders who believe that India should enjoy more autonomy and more self rule are going to use the Enlightenment to justify their position of getting the British less involved in Indian affairs. The other thing that comes with this Western based education system is the exposure to ideals like feminism and socialism and communism. So the Western ideas are making their way into India. And one of the other things is that within India for a long time, there are many different dialects of language. But with this widespread English system, the English language starts to get taught. And as we know, anytime that a society has a common language, nationalism is not going to be that far behind. So even though within India there are several different languages spoken, throughout the 19th and 20th century, English was a language that anybody in India could speak. And that became a uniting force later on. The introduction of the Western legal system also plays into this unification system. Now, obviously, the Western legal system is going to favor Europeans in India over the Indians themselves, creating a segregated society. And that goes right along with social Darwinism. But the other thing that the Western legal system does is it starts to create consistency of laws throughout India. So, again, if we remember that India for a long time has really been broken up regional kingdoms, what is now happening is that there's one legal system that is bringing all of these kingdoms and regions together. Laws restricting Indian textiles. I think this is one of the most important things out of this impact. The idea is that the British are going to put laws in that are going to restrict the production of Indian textiles. This is important because what it does is it opens the Indian market up to British made goods underselling the Indian goods. So Indian industries are going to start dying off because of this. And as a result, the Indian economy is going to be less self sufficient. It's going to be much more reliant on the British economy. And really, what happens is the Indian economy becomes a vehicle by which the British economy is made rich. So the idea of an Indian owning a factory producing textiles is going to have to wait for a long time because the laws undermine that, allowing British made goods to undermine Indian production. There are also going to be new ways of farming, but that farming methods, because Europe had innovated agricultural practices leading to larger yields. So when the British come into India, they bring that knowledge of agricultural innovation with them. However, they're not doing it so that the Indians can grow more food to feed themselves. They're bringing those agricultural innovations in so that British owned plantations worked by Indian farmers and support the British economy. And of course, that connects to cash cropping. Some of the biggest cash crops included tea, opium, and cotton. And those three products, the profits from which benefited the British pockets, not the Indian pockets. Lastly, of course, with Western science comes advances in medical knowledge into Indian society. Now we're going to segue into the emergence of Indian nationalism. So, with Indian nationalism, you have this idea that a group of people are going to say, we want India to be for the Indians. We want the British to reduce their role or outright leave. Now, that attitude of working with the British to getting rid of the British is going to change over the course of the decades. So, in 1885, you see much more of an attitude of working with the British in order to create more Indian independence. By 1930, it's let's get rid of the British so we can be independent. So this attitude is going to change. But we're really going to kind of pinpoint the Sepoy Rebellion for an example of Indian nationalism. The Sepoys resented the British for the way the British treated the Sepoys. The British saw the Sepoys as second class citizens. They saw them as an inferior race to the British. And the idea is that the Sepoys kind of hit a point where they've had enough. There's a rumor about cartridges being greased. with pig and cow grease, pig and cow lard. There it is. That when a soldier bites into the packet containing the musket ball, they're biting into lard made of pigs and cows. That is sacrilegious to both Muslims who see the pig as dirty and to Hindus who see the cow as sacred. But that rumor isn't enough to justify the rebellion. There's a lot more that has been building up. It's just that this rumor is the straw that breaks the camel's back. And as a result, you have this rebellion that blows up into a conflict that takes the British government about a year to suppress. The British have to commit more troops to suppress the Sepoy Rebellion. And in 1858, the British passed the Government in India Act. And what the Government in India Act does is it allows British Parliament, it allows the Parliament of Britain to govern the affairs of India as a colony. And now India becomes part of the British Empire. Before then, India was heavily influenced by the East India Company. But after 1858, India now becomes ruled directly by the British. And this begins what we call the British Raj. So the crown jewel of the empire, which is letter C, that refers to the attitude that India was so vital to the British economy. It was like the crown jewel, the jewel that stood out the most on top of the crown of the British Empire. And therefore, since the economic interests of Britain are so tied into India, they are going to do a great deal to try and maintain control over India over the next several decades. Now, within India, there are Indian thinkers and Indian writers and Indian leaders who are arguing the case of Indian nationalism. One of these is Ram Mohan Roy. He's going to come about the 1820s, so before the Sepoy Rebellion. And what Ram Mohan Roy argues for is a modernized India. He wants to break away from superstitions and traditions that he views as being uninformed and holding India back from the modern age. He's somebody who is a staunch opponent of the Sati practice. However, Ram Mohan Roy also wants India to run India. What he believes is that the British need to give up control to the Indians so the Indians can run Indian affairs. Now, he's not an outright get rid of the British type of guy. He's willing to work with the British because he sees in the British knowledge that could benefit the Indian nation. But his ultimate goal is to get India to a point where it can function independently. Now, he's going to die before that is even seen. The next manifestation of this attitude is in the Indian National Congress, which is a political party formed in 1885. And the goal of this party is to do exactly what Ram Mohan Roy wanted, to create a modern state of India that is independent of British control. Now, when you pursue independence, there's really two ways you can do it. You can either do it through the evolutionary approach, which is gradually over time, you get more and more independence. And this attitude says, let me prove to the stronger power that I am capable of ruling myself. Let me demonstrate my capacity for self government, and they will grant me self government. The other thing is the revolutionary approach, which says we're going to just break away and we're done with it. The Indian National Congress in 1885 is taking the evolutionary approach. They want more Indians working in the bureaucracy of the British government within India. They are steeped within the Enlightenment ideas, particularly of natural rights and the right to self-government. They also want to preserve elements of Indian tradition, but they're also willing to modernize. But ultimately, they want Indian independence. This group, after about 1920, is going to change gears, and we'll talk about why when we get to that. Change gears to say the British need to go. And that's when you start creating a revolutionary group. The Indian National Congress, though, is not the only voice for breaking away from Britain. The Muslim League is the other voice. In 1906, the Muslim League is founded, and the principle behind the Muslim League is that the Muslims of the Indian subcontinent should have their own voice protected as well. They should have their own Muslim dominated state so that they can have their self government and they can have their representative government. Because to them, the Indian National Congress represents the interests of the Hindu society, not the interests of the Muslim society. Ultimately, the idea of the Muslim League will transform in 1947 into Pakistan. So that's where we'll leave India. Next time, we'll talk about Oceania, Japan, and the Ottoman Empire. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, as always, bring them to class. And I hope you guys are staying safe. And I will talk to you again soon. Bye.